May it please the court,
Yes.
counsel, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. I'm sorry about the delay. You heard it in our opening. A person should never drive a car if they're under the influence. A person should never drive a car if their blood alcohol level is more than twice the legal limit. A person should never drive a car at 83 miles an hour with a blood alcohol level twice the legal limit. A person should never drive a car if their blood alcohol level is twice the legal limit. They should not drive 83 miles an hour, and they should not drive with an unbelted passenger. We have proven the defendant did all those things. We have proven that he showed extreme indifference to the value of human life. We have proven that he showed extreme indifference to the value of Shanae Moorman's life. In the early morning hours of August 6, 2016, Bradley Caraway murdered Shanae Moorman. He was the driver. That's been proven. How do we know? Ms. Sconanine told you in opening, the car itself was going to be one of the best pieces of evidence. The car's event data recorder told us several important things. And we know that the event data recorder is reliable because everyone agrees it's reliable. John Northrup told you that. John Northrup, a man who's crashed over 200 cars, testing the EDRs for their reliability, he told you the EDRs in this case are reliable. The defense expert, Sonny Cease, he agreed it was reliable. It's downloaded 3 different times, 3 years apart. What did it say? Every time. Driver's seatbelt on, passenger seatbelt off. Now we heard a lot from Mr. McGee about the disclaimer in the event in the data limitations on the CDR report. What did it say? It said event data should be considered in conjunction with other available physical evidence from the scene. Event data should be considered in conjunction with other available physical evidence from the scene. But what else did the EDR tell us? It told us the speed. 5 seconds prior to the crash, the car was going 83 miles an hour. That's consistent with the scene. That car traveled 500 feet. What else did it tell us? Well, it told us that the roll rate of the car was negative. We asked Sonny Cease about it. It says positive roll rate indicating left to right clockwise rotation. Positive roll rate is left to right or clockwise. That's the driver's side going over the passenger side. Negative means passenger side going over the driver's side. The car in this case, Mr. Caraway's Honda, rotated passenger over driver. EDR says that. Their expert agreed in his report. He said it was a counterclockwise rotation. But then yesterday, he changed his mind. He said it was clockwise. He said it was rotating driver over passenger. But then, when he was confronted about the roll rate in the CDR data, well, then he changed again. Now it's not only rotating, it's spinning, it's flipping, it's turning, it's going all over the place. And why did he have to change? Because he knows the EDR is reliable. Several times he said the car impacted the embankment in the right front. The car impacted the embankment in the right front. That's their expert's opinion. Event data should be considered in conjunction with other available physical evidence from the scene. What does the physical evidence from the scene show? There's the right front tire. There's the left front tire. The left front tire very obviously impacted the embankment. The right front tire looks nearly new. This one filled with dirt and debris. Tire is off the rim. So what does that tell us? The car collided in the left front and rotated driver over passenger. Excuse me, passenger over driver, just like we have said all along. Why is that important? Because Miss Moorman, who was in the passenger seat, was catapulted out of the car, as John Northrop told you, because the passenger seat rotated over the driver's seat. Sonny Cease could not refute the EDR. He knew it. So, what did we suddenly hear yesterday for the first time ever? That Miss Moorman was belted. Who actually changed their theory in this case? Was it the Commonwealth, or was it Mr. Eggert in the defense yesterday? In his opening, what did he say? Shanae Moorman was the unbelted driver. And then suddenly today, or yesterday, we hear, oh no, she was belted. Why? Because they cannot refute the EDR. So they had to change. So now, Shanae is belted. She slid out of the belt. Their expert, who hasn't been in charge of investigating collisions since 2004, said he'd seen that happen hundreds of times. Presented no studies or articles or even examples. He just told us hundreds of times that it happened. He even said, his quote was, "Being belted doesn't make any difference in a rollover." Well, he should probably call the news about that, because we maybe need to change our seatbelts if that's the problem. Now, Clarence, who's been investigating traffic collisions for 34 years, still investigates them to this day, says he has never seen an example of a belted occupant being ejected. Dr. Springer, the ME, said it's extremely rare for a belted occupant to be ejected. Detective Buford, what did he say is more likely? That they're still hanging down, strapped in, upside down. John Northrop said, when there's a rollover collision and someone is outside the vehicle and they're dead, it's because they were unbelted. And I just want to point out, he never said that you can be belted and ejected. He said you can slide and you could impact the airbag or the windshield. You could slide around a little bit. Never did he say you can be ejected while you're belted. He said the opposite. He said if there's a rollover and someone's outside the vehicle and they're dead, they were unbelted. The EDR cannot be refuted, so they had to change their story. And they had to change it yesterday. Suddenly, Shanae was belted. The defendant was unbelted. And they both were ejected. We didn't hear that in opening. That was the first time we heard that was yesterday. Mr. Caraway was ejected. Event data should be considered with other physical evidence from the scene. Well, let's think about their new theory, the theory from yesterday. If Shanae was belted and was the driver, and she slid out and was ejected and ended up underneath the car, what would we expect that seatbelt to show? We would expect it to still be buckled. The seatbelt was not buckled. On August 9th, there it is, pulled on the seat, unbuckled. The only person who unbuckled that seatbelt was the person who was driving that car. The only person who unbuckled that seatbelt was Bradley Caraway. Now, what else about the seatbelts? The tension marks, the friction marks. Dr. Smock told you about those in great detail. Dr. Smock, who spent 40 years doing driver versus passenger determination and analysis, whose protocols are used nationwide to do this thing. They're used by the FBI, the Department of Defense, the U.S. Attorney's Office, KSP. Dr. Smock, who Sonny Cease asked to come and train KSP. Their own expert's expert, Dr. Smock. These marks show the belt was worn. It was pulled tight. It was stretched. That only happens in an accident. That can only happen from a crash. Dr. Smock, in his textbooks, in his articles, have written about those kinds of marks. John Northrop agreed. Those marks only appear in a crash. And what did we hear from their expert? Because they have to explain that away. Wear and tear. A 2014 Honda. In 2016, the seatbelts are being worn out. I think that's two things now that Sonny Cease is not calling the media about that he probably should. He's not believable. He's the one who changed his story. Sonny Cease is the one that would say anything to explain anything. The event data should be considered in conjunction with other physical evidence from the scene. The EDR is reliable. The driver's belt was worn in the crash. It was pulled tight. It developed those friction marks. It was unbuckled when the police looked at it. Only one person could have unbuckled it. The person in the driver's seat after the car came to a rest. That can't be Shanae. She's underneath the car, suffocating to death. Had to be the defendant. He's hanging upside down. He reaches up. He unbuckles the seatbelt. And what happens? He falls down and strikes his face on the windshield. What other physical evidence supports this? The marks on the defendant. The seatbelt marks on the defendant. The seatbelt marks that Detective Buford says are seatbelt marks, that Dr. Smock says are seatbelt marks. These are the photos from Dr. Smock's forensic exam. He talked about how you take them in a very specific way. You make sure you line up that measurement so that you can get exact measurements, so that you can make comparisons like this. That mark right there matches up exactly in size with the seatbelt. But suddenly yesterday we hear those marks are from a hospital gurney. Because suddenly yesterday, Mr. Caraway is not wearing a seatbelt. In opening statements he was. Between opening statements and yesterday, he changed his mind. He's not wearing a seatbelt anymore. Their own expert said you cannot refute the EDR, so they had to change their story. They have to say Mr. Caraway's unbelted. They have to say he's ejected. They say he's out of the vehicle before Shanae was. Now all week and just now, we heard all about the DNA in the car. We're told yesterday that the defendant is out of the car before Shanae. He's ejected first. And Shanae is in the car until almost it stops. This whole case, this morning, the defense has been trying to confuse you. They've complained about the lack of testing. They did it just now. Any time in the last 7 years, they could have requested additional testing. But they didn't want that.
Objection, Your Honor. May we approach him?
You may.
The inside of the car is like a washing machine. We just heard John Northrop say that. Smock agreed. Wendy Allman said you had to consider the car one piece of evidence because the blood is flying around, is tumbling around. Yet where's Shanae's blood inside the car? It's not. Shanae's blood is not inside the car because she was ejected, because she is unbuckled. The defendant driving the car loses control, runs off the road, the car starts tumbling. Physics tell you Shanae is tumbling inside the car. The car starts rolling, passenger side over driver side. She's thrown against the window breaks, she is ejected, she is catapulted out, as John Northrop told you. Her injuries were sustained outside the car. That's why her blood is not in the car. Who remained in the car? The defendant, because he was belted. His blood is all over the car. Dr. Smock told you about the single most important piece of DNA evidence, and that's his blood on the windshield, the driver's side windshield. We heard a lot about a head strike. We saw that picture of Shanae's injury to her head. Her DNA is not on the windshield. His DNA is on the windshield. We see the injuries to his face. Sonny Cease tried it yesterday. Mr. Eggert tried it again today. There's injuries to his face. We can try to pretend there's not, but there are. Shanae never had a chance to deposit any blood in the car. The defendant, head, struck the windshield right there, just above the steering wheel. They try to tell you over and over again, it's to the right of the steering wheel. It's to the right of the steering wheel. Right there. There's the steering wheel. His DNA is right there. And why is that important? Why is that more important than his DNA on the airbag? Because that's from a head strike. It's skin to glass transfer. There's glass in his hair. There's injuries to his face where he struck the windshield. There's bloody glass in his hair. Here's another point. Look at his face. Look at the puffiness and bruising to the side of his face right here. What does that tell us? That he was seated next to the driver's side airbag that deployed. That curtain airbag that we hear about. Shanae's blood, the only place we see that is on his shirt. His shirt, which is on the ground outside of the car. Shanae has a nasty cut on her leg. Her legs, which are the only thing sticking out from under the car on Officer Wood's body cam. The defendant, belted in the car comes to rest. He reaches up, he unbuckles himself. He falls, he hits his head on the windshield, leaving his blood. He crawls out the passenger side, depositing additional blood on the airbag. He walks around the car. He sees Shanae. He gets her blood on him. He realizes it's pretty hard to deny I was in a car crash when I have blood on my shirt. So he removes his shirt. He leaves the crash site. Doesn't call for help. Doesn't wave down cars. He flees because he was driving, because he was drunk, because he was speeding. He was weaving around cars. He flees because he murdered Shanae. The defense is trying to confuse you. They keep talking about a concussion. There is no evidence of a concussion. Dr. Smock, an emergency physician, was there when he was examined. He did an examination of him. He's made his whole career investigating crashes. What did he say about the defendant? Awake, alert, oriented. What did the defendant say about any injuries to EMS or to U of L? No complaints. No complaints of headache, jaw pain, dizziness. EMS and U of L found him to be awake, alert, and oriented. They did a thing called the Glasgow Coma Scale, which measures your consciousness, and he had the highest score. The defense is trying to confuse you. They do not want you to use your common sense. You're hearing terms like confirmation bias, that Officer Buford made up his mind on the early morning hours of August 6th. But he didn't. We heard that. They keep playing that one clip where he says, he might have been the driver. He has to be the driver, I would think. But then what did he tell Miss Moorman later that morning? We don't know. When did he charge Mr. Caraway with murder? August the 10th, 4 days later, after he had Smock's preliminary report, after he had downloaded the EDR which can't be refuted. Miss Moorman is dead under the car. Bradley Caraway is mostly fine, discharged from U of L with Tylenol. They want you to focus on the key. The key's the biggest distraction in this whole thing. We don't know anything about Mr. Caraway's habits. We don't know if he would always carry around a single key. We don't know if he'd take the key off when he was going out on a weekend night. We don't know anything about how he carries his key. The crime lab didn't test the key. Well, what did they test? They tested the steering wheel. Why did they test the steering wheel? They told you, because that's a high-touch area. It generally has ridges and things on it that can lead to touch DNA. The key is a distraction. It tells you nothing about how this accident occurred. Its purpose is to confuse you. Now, what does the Commonwealth want? The Commonwealth wants you to use your common sense. We trust you to use your common sense. We called Scott Burrows, the mechanic, who we asked to determine whether the car was operating appropriately. He said it was. That was his purpose. Was there any mechanical issues with the car? He likely made a mistake in his report. That happens. Sonny Cease said that happens. Sonny Cease made mistakes in his report. The physical evidence doesn't match up with his report. He agreed with that. He admitted on the stand that those photos taken a week prior contradict his report. We're not doing that. We're not pointing that out to be a jerk. We're trying to attack the experts. We're trying to show you that the photos are the best evidence. Because you, the jury, you're the expert of this case. The Commonwealth presented to you that they had to remap the scene because they realized that they did the wrong thing. The Commonwealth admitted all the medical records, all of Smock's forensic exam photos, not the 3 that Sonny Cease tried to use to prove that there was no cut on his forehead. We want you to use your common sense. What does common sense say about this case? Bradley Caraway was the belted driver. Shanae was not driving. Shanae took Ubers or got rides that whole night. She always Ubered when she was drinking. We heard that from her mom. We heard that from her best friend, Ronald Ford. She rode from 4th Street to St. Matthews with Brad Gant, her ex-boyfriend. She had an intimate relationship with him. Did she drive his car? No, she rode. But they want you to think that she drove a stranger's car. She met a stranger in a bar, said, "Give me the keys, I'm driving," and they drove off. And they want you to believe on the inverse of that, that Bradley Caraway met a stranger in a bar and handed her his car keys. Now the Gerstl's videos, we saw a little bit of them, but I want to watch some of them again. I want to look at the body language. Who's in charge here, really? You see Shanae talking to people, having fun, dancing. And who comes charging in? A man on a mission. Bradley Caraway. Arm around her, pulling her close. Keeping his arm on her back. She walks away. Immediately, he turns around. Where's she going? Look, he's looking for her. She comes back again. He pulls her in close. He wants her with him. He orders his last beer. Pulls her close again, not letting her go. Doesn't like that she's talking to that other guy. There, he orders his last beer. He's ready to go. Touching her on her back. He's got a one-track mind. Let's get out of here. Struts out. Now, common sense would ask, where are they going? Not going to Shanae's house, because they'd already passed that. Not going back to the Highlands, where she had started her night with Ronald Ford and her friends. They're going to the defendant's house. Why would Shanae be driving the defendant's car to his house? We heard from James Smalley. He testified that the defendant's car went flying past him. He estimated it was going at least 100 miles an hour. It made a sharp right turn in front of him onto the ramp. It's going so fast that he felt the air pressure. There was no second car involved in this. He made that very clear. The defendant's car turned down this ramp. Mr. Smalley, who lived north of 64, turned up this ramp. So did that other car that he said was going not nearly as fast as the defendant. Common sense tells you the defendant was driving his car to his house. He had a one-track mind. He was so drunk and driving so fast that he thought he was about to miss his turn. And he turned right in front of Smalley. Next exit, not for 10 miles. Got to get home. Got to get Shanae home. He's got a .2 BAC. He's highly impaired. He can't make the turn. He crashes. Shanae is thrown. She goes out the passenger window. She lands under the car. She is pinned. She asphyxiates. He flees, and he's found walking down the ramp almost 4 hours later. He's still turned around. He still doesn't know that he missed his exit. He's trying to walk home, walking along the Gene Snyder. He's trying to walk home. He's trying to walk away from this murder. Now we heard again about the statements. The confusing statements. We hear about the concussion. There's no evidence of a concussion, but we hear about it because they don't want you to think about how cold and calculated these statements are. He tells EMS he's out with friends in St. Matthews. He tells them that a cab dropped him off on the expressway. How did he get on the expressway? He has to explain that. He denies being in an accident. But then we get to U of L Hospital. He changes his story. He says he was in an accident, but he doesn't know if he was the driver or the passenger. He now says he was wearing a seatbelt. Or maybe he was in an Uber, or maybe an Uber driver was in his car. Use your common sense about the statements. He's trying to craft a story that fits the position he is in. On I-265, deny, deny, deny. I wasn't in an accident. A cab dropped me here. I don't need to go to the hospital. Nothing happened to me. But then, he's told he's going to the hospital no matter what. A search warrant's being obtained. Well, now I have to explain these things. So someone else had to be the driver. It's cold and it's calculated. Just like when he led Shanae out of Gerstl's, just like when he tried to get her back to his house. Driving at a high rate of speed, nearly 20 miles an hour over the speed limit, swerving around cars with an unbelted passenger at a .2 BAC, more than twice the legal limit. Construction, murder, the only one you need. Extreme indifference to the value of human life. Bradley Caraway was a time bomb, flying down that interstate. He's drunk, he's flying, he's got an unbelted passenger, he's a time bomb. He didn't care whether she lived or died. That's murder. That's murder in Kentucky. That's murder in Jefferson County. Just like driving drunk in a park and crashing into a golf cart is murder in Jefferson County. He didn't care whether she lived or died. It's cold and calculated. He drives, he's trying to get her home. He's at a .2. He crashes. He flips the car. He stays in the car. He's mostly fine because he's buckled. Shanae is under the car, dead. He leaves. Leaves her to suffocate to death. He's guilty of murder. And Mr. Egger tried to play on your emotions by talking about the penalty, but you can't consider that. You can only consider what he did. And he showed extreme indifference to the value of Shanae Moorman's life. He drove at a high rate of speed. He drove drunk. He drove with an unbelted passenger. He's swerving around cars. He is a cold, calculating, cowardly killer. And he's guilty of the murder of Shanae Moorman.